my question is, to what extent, like, even in the Carrollton facility, did you look at that, or did you actually integrate data systems, building management systems with LED lighting?
Yes, we did. It's all of the lights are individually tied into the building automation system. What we're experiencing mostly is that we are getting the most efficacy today by having lighting control systems separate from the building automation system and then integrating the two. There are integrating software out there. In GSA's headquarters building, we happen to use IBIS. There are others out there. This was a result of a competitive procurement. Generally speaking, building automation systems don't optimize lighting as well as lighting systems do today. I don't think that that's going to be the permanent state of affairs, but I think that's roughly where we are today. I don't know if you guys want to add to that?
The only thing I would add to that is that you're taking advantage of other data that's in the building where it's coming from the automation system or something, and many of these in some cases aren't connected or can be expensive to do that. Bringing in all relevant information is just critically important. We've seen on the lighting system where they've used that to understand kind of intraday occupancy, right, where are we sort of moving and get more into that kind of strategy. But there's a lot of additional metadata that can be included in the building, and we've done stadiums where we're overlaying, the concerts and the football periods are there and when they've got to get things down. So all this particular data can really help to kind of optimize in what's relevant in this, and of course lighting is a big part of that.
I just add one thing to that. Don't expect the control system to do all of the work. What we're finding is that there's huge potential energy savings by understanding what you want the default conditions to be, getting the default conditions right, and then giving users override. So for the example that I like to use, you don't actually want an occupancy sensor in your rooms. You want a vacancy sensor. Same device, but it's programmed differently, so the only thing it does is turn the lights off. You get people to turn the lights on if they need it. If the machine turns the lights on, people won't turn them off. If the machine doesn't turn the lights on, about 50% of the time, neither will the people because they don't need them.
Where we start off in any particular building is trying to go to the point of least resistance, right? Which is not trying to figure out what you can do at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, right? Where you're going to, the building team is going to say, hey, we don't want to do anything. But really starting in those unoccupied periods. And that can be a gold mine to begin with. You're going to find issues that exist that continue on through the rest of the day. Things running that don't need to be running and so forth. But I mean, that's at least where we start getting going. And it also motivates the building teams like, wow, I didn't know we could do that, and seeing the results.
So the classic measure that everybody agrees on is BTUs per gross square foot per year. I'm not a huge fan of that, but it's available for benchmarking. I think once you get, but it's a very static measure. It's an annual measure. You don't even have 12 data points. You have 1 data point for the year. So I agree on the issue is interval data. You want to get to interval data, and you want to look at the consumption and see things that don't make sense. And that is really just, you start with electricity, and then you move to the other energy sources.
Yeah. Just a couple of points of color to that. Occupancy versus non-occupancy, absolutely, that's the place to start. We also like startup and shutdown, which might be part of occupied, non-occupied. But just to clarify, you may have to start your building up or down differently based on your relationship with your utility and your tariffs, right? But the point is that, and this is to your point, you shouldn't have unexplained uses of electricity in your building or any other resource, right? Like, this is not like you're going to find usage and say, aha, that's my thing. But it should be, I understand why the air conditioning was on at 2 a.m. on a Saturday, right? For example, you may have a law firm in your building that's working on a deposition, and they're asking for after-hours lighting or cooling, right? But you should be able to point to that and say, oh, yeah, that was when they requested the lights to still be on. That's why that big peak was, not what the heck is this, right? That's the difference. Patty. Oh, Bill.
Joe, in your experiences, you have a multitude of different types of buildings, from schools to universities to manufacturing to football buildings. Do you see a commonality in what buildings you are successful with and which buildings you are not successful with, as far as knowing the buildings and implementing what can be done?
He has none of the not successful buildings. I
Well-
can tell you that already.
Well, it's just a more matter of what the percentage is, but part of that can actually come, well, the ones that we've been least successful, at least to begin with, is where we couldn't get the property management team on our side, right? And we actually had to go back to the owner, and we tried, because, I mean, our way that we work is you get another building by how successful you were at the first one, so we'll work with them, you know, we're not trying to yell, we're not trying to get anybody fired, and we know that there's so much that could be done. In this particular case, it took a year to kind of get them on board, but then they're a huge proponent, and they've helped with that particular kind of get us 20 more buildings in Dallas, and that guy's the key proponent with this. So at the very beginning, there can be mistrust or not really sure where you're coming from and what you can kind of see, and we don't know anything, but we're also trying to give them the respect of what they know, and I think that's been one of the most successful parts. But there's a flip side of that, and the flip side, and Sean touched on this a little bit, of knowing what's happening at different times. We don't assume that we see a building profile that it needs to run that way. Now, if we see an industrial, we've done lots of them, we're not going to go tell them how to make this piece of equipment or that piece of equipment, but you start to look in areas and say, I don't quite understand this, what do you need to do? But if we took the approach of, hey, you must run it that way because somebody made that decision, then I think of a great Virginia building, different than the one I showed up there, that from every day of the summer ran between 1 a.m. and 11 p.m. every day. You know, the owner had no idea, right? They were just going and doing it. Tenants weren't complaining. So it's a point of working with the local team and getting them on your side. There's so much more you can figure out, and they'll go out and find things themselves. We did this in Maryland with a project with some of the state buildings, and boy, once you got the team on board, you couldn't almost turn them off. And that can become very motivating for us and for the local team.
Yeah, I think that I talked a lot when I was talking about the value of having that sort of central analytics, getting some high-powered people there. That is I would say, a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition. The difference between that, I would say, is the difference between getting 80% and getting 99% is having the local people on board. However, if you don't have the local people on board, your chances of getting 80% are zero. And your chances of getting zero are really high. So it is definitely the local operator, whoever that is, getting that person on board is absolutely the most critical factor.
Can you talk about whether or not the split incentive is migrating or changing nature, and how are you confronting that in terms of the challenges with interest between tenants and property owners?
GSA has half of its buildings are leased from the private sector, where we run into the theoretical split incentives. We're not a good case study for the typical landlord-tenant relationship, because unlike everybody else's lease, we write the lease and the landlord bids on it. This is not the way the normal lease in a landlord-tenant relationship is developed. What we are doing, though, is we are systematically, all the major leases, we're switching to a net of utilities approach, which changes the split incentives pretty dramatically. We think that clearly the way the typical lease is written in the United States today, in most markets, the split incentive is more theoretical, and whenever I hear somebody talking about it, I think that there's a person trying to find an excuse not to do anything. The fact of the matter is that we're wasting money, and getting somebody's attention with real data makes the split incentive argument disappear. I think.
No, we've seen that as well, I think, on this. And if we go back a couple of years, maybe 3 or 4, we'd sit down with an owner and say, hey, I'm all on triple net, right? So I don't really care. We don't hear that much anymore. And as I identified in the presentation, part of that is because of investors, of what tenants are writing into their particular leases. But we don't hear it even beyond that particular part, because I think they understand that it's just the best way we need to run a building. And so it just doesn't come up as much in this particular case. We can do a better job. And if you're in a market that's got a high vacancy level, well, then the tenants have a choice, right? And they can move down the street, then all of a sudden the owner's in a real bond.
Just to add on that, we're seeing similar trends where tenants care a lot more about how they use energy because it is more of their responsibility. And in a lot of cases, the building owner or property manager is not in a position to do well at that today, right? You may have meters on your tenants, you may not. You have to walk the building. You have to remember what you wrote down, carry it back to some spreadsheet. Eventually, it's a very complicated process, and then ultimately you end up putting some fudge factor on the other side of it because I don't really know how much you actually used after all. And so it is a space ripe for submetering plus being able to take that submeter data and actually provide your tenant with a viable summary of their energy usage in the building that stands up to sort of, not only the financial audit, but also just, the spirit of the relationship you're trying to have with them.
What I'm interested to find out is whether you have an average cost per square feet for your systems to install. Because what we do is eventually, I'm a building operator, if I have a great idea, I need to present that to the boss. How much is going to cost per square foot? Because, they have to look at the whole thing through a lens of other budgets. And based on that, it can be cut or it can be advanced. So do you have an average cost of, can you share that with us?
Yeah, so the question is, sort of what's the cost of all this, right? I have budgets too, right? So I'm trying to be generalized in my answer here, right? If you want to go the traditional route and have Siemens come in and put wired meters in, your meters are going to be $5,000–6,000 each. You're going to have to spend $30,000 to $40,000 on maybe the software or the whole hardware setup, whatever, right? The trend now is with the wireless meters and something like Aquacore, but obviously there are competitors and as well in our space, is more like $1,000 to $2,000 a meter, I would say, and we're trying to push. We think that the more we push that price down, the more we create opportunity for ourselves. So we want to innovate on the hardware side too, and then a monthly fee more in the range of, let's say, like a couple $100 to $300 a month per building, right? Which can be a lot of money for your budgets, but it's a lot cheaper than $50,000 or whatever it would cost you to go the more traditional route.
So I just add one thing. Meters can cost $100 as long as you don't have to hook them directly to the utility. And the price is available. And the difference in accuracy is not meaningful. That's one thing I'd like to say. The other thing is that generally speaking, installing meters and systems like this, you will get a payback in the same year of installation, generally speaking. I have never seen a case in GSA's inventory where we didn't find enough in the first year to pay for all of the installation. Not the wired version, but
We take a little bit of a different approach on that, as we're using existing data that's there, right? We got multiple meters that are here in the Pepco area, and as long as you don't have a really complex multi-use type facility like a hospital, there's an awful lot you can see. In California, mentioned you can get 30 meters or more. They're down to very, very low levels, and then taking advantage of the building automation system. So for us, there's no upfront cost whatsoever of going through this, and what we're also able to do is, because that historical information is already there, upwards of a couple of years, we can already pre-screen your building and show you what you're going to be able to do. So part of this is very important of, well, just, somebody's coming in, they can do this. Everybody can say they can do different things, but look for somebody that can be able to, come in and show you your building itself with existing data that's already there and give you a sense for what you can already achieve. And that can really help through the overall process.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I want to build on that same question, but it's about time. Once someone decides to go through this process, how long does it take them before they can actually see some of this operational data and start to make decisions based on it?
3 weeks, right? You can start right at the very beginning, and that's the whole idea of we're focusing. I'm sure it's the same here, where let's focus in the season that we're in. We'll get to the winter when we get to the winter and start working through this, because that helps you get the building team on board, and related also to sort of cost with this, that when they start to see that you've got a payback on the cost of our system and services in 3 months, right? On a weather-adjusted basis, it's really quite motivating. So you can see them very early. We're not going to pick, hey, let's worry about heat right now. Let's worry about the cooling. Let's worry about the transition. It's now starting to get hot here, and how to work in this. It's just, I think, a typical way of approaching it.
This is a part of AquaCore's philosophy is we want to get you up and running quickly. So our goal is 30 days from the moment you sign to the moment that data is flowing into our platform where you can start to make decisions. And we're pretty close to that for the most part. More complex buildings take a little bit longer. We can also do Green Button Connect to have you up and running in day one. So it does not take long to start to be able to see things. That will not be what another competitor will say, by the way. This is one of our things, just so you know. They'll have a little bit longer cycle.
Any other questions?
So I'm wondering about the sort of competitive nature of there may already be someone in the building who feels like they've got some expertise and yeah, we've got lots of problems why we haven't fixed them yet, but we know what's wrong, and how do you sort of frame this up for someone who does have expertise and knowledge about the buildings to sort of make this a little less of an affront to their expertise?
I'll take a first shot at that. So the question is, how do you sort of work with the, I'll say it slightly differently. How do you work with the building engineer who already knows his building and may view you as a threat to sort of his power in the building, let's say? I actually have found that like the trend these days is that building engineers have bosses, and their bosses are coming to them and saying, I don't want you just to come in and every day and turn everything on and then make sure like you clean up the lobby and then go home at night anymore, right? I want you to have energy projects. I want you to be, I'm going to give you, we hear all the time like, can you, actually have one of our customers who asked, can you fudge the data by 10% so it looks like they're doing worse than they're doing and then they'll have to work harder? I mean, there is this like, I want to like push my building engineer to get better. By the way, we said no to that request. This idea of now their boss is saying to them, you need to do better, right? And now the building engineer is saying, I have no tools to do that, right? I have a building automation system that may or may not provide me any kind of data or insights. I have a monthly utility bill. If I'm super smart, I can do like a green button download and try to find my own trends, but they're like, please come help me. We run much less into, I don't want anything to, hey, I already bought something else, and how does this compare to what I already have, I would say.
So I'm tempted to pass the microphone over to my colleague who does this sort of day in and day out, if you're willing, Joe.
Hi, Mike Wyatt here. He works in my branch too. He actually goes into our real-time metering every week and pulls the trend and sends it out to the property management teams and lets them look at it. And that's where I would go with this, and it's a time saver. We have these really skilled property managers and their contracted facility manager teams. They know their systems, but they don't have the time to go in there and look at every set point and walk their building and look at every piece of equipment and see if it's what the signal's sending is what the equipment's doing. So getting even simple graphs sent to them saves them the time and effort of logging into a system and looking at it. And something more detailed where it's pulling multiple points and saying, if this is open and this is closed, then the temperature should be dropping here and it's not. That's something that they could do. And you can say, we know you're smart enough to do this, but we also know that you're not going to do it because you're worried about the cleanliness of the lobby. So getting these messages sent to you gives you a place to start and think about what to do. And then that's having the person on board and winning them over at the beginning, because otherwise it is a got you, and then it takes a year to get them back over.
Thank you.
The only thing I was going to say is I don't think we've ever gone to the building. The first thing the building engineer gave us a big hug when we first walked in, okay? Okay, so that doesn't really happen. But again, you think about our financial system, we got to get those next buildings, and tapping into the knowledge that they have and the willingness to work is critically important. So, I mean, we're all emphasizing the same thing here in that case.